They're back. Astronauts Butch Wilmore and Suni Williams are finally home. A mission that we know was supposed to only be 8 days, stretched out to 9 months in space due to issues with the Boeing Starliner spacecraft. So you probably saw it when they splashed back down to Earth last night off the coast of Florida. They were taken out of the water there and then taken to the Johnson Space Center in Texas for medical testing. Still a few more days till they get to go home. But what's next for these two? And when do they actually get to be in their own beds? To answer that, we're joined this morning from Edmonton by Dr. Shauna Pandya. She's a research astronaut who's going to be flying with the Virgin Galactic Delta class as soon as next year. I feel like we're going to talk to you again about that. But first of all, this story. Good morning, Dr. Pandya.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
So just before we get to what's happening for Suni and Butch this morning, could you walk us through what they would have experienced both leaving the ISS and space and then coming back to Earth?
Yeah, there is a lot that goes on in the background. There is so much coordination. It's not just the teams on the International Space Station, the ISS, but it is also the teams between SpaceX and NASA, and all of the coordination and planning to go home starts days in advance. So up on the station, the crew is packing a week in advance, 48 hours ahead of the designated undocking time. NASA and SpaceX are looking at their 7 designated landing sites. They're picking one, making sure they have an alternate. They're looking at the weather at the sites, making sure there's no lightning within 10 nautical miles. They're sending out a notice to the U.S. Coast Guard, to all the mariners. They're making sure that everything is still on track. They make that final go or no-go launch just as the ISS doors are closing to that SpaceX capsule. And then they finally make that go call. Then the space capsule undocks. They began a series of phasing burns. And in this case, it took 17 hours. They began their final deorbit burn, enter the Earth's atmosphere, reaching temperatures of up to 1900 degrees Celsius. There's this loss of signal, and then they re-enter. And in this case, they landed at the Tallahassee landing site. And oh my gosh, you could not have asked for a better landing. For anyone who enough to see this live, it was pure poetry. You saw these main chutes unfurling like jellyfish on these calm turquoise waters in the ocean, and then you saw this pod of dolphins swim up to see what was happening. So it was just a 10 out of 10 splashdown.
Yeah, thanks for walking us through that. I'm so curious about what happens for these two today. Like, what are they going to experience when they wake up this morning, and what sort of tests are on the agenda for them?
Yeah, 9 months in space is not easy on the body, even when you're a seasoned astronaut like Butch, Suni, Nick, and Alexander. And there's this confluence and this mismatch that happens between 3 key bodily systems. So your neurosensory system, that including your inner ear, which senses balance, and your cardiovascular system, which in normal 1G conditions is working to keep that blood flow circulating, as well as your musculoskeletal system. Your muscles are decompensating in space. And so for anyone who is watching the crew egressing or exiting, you can notice that they were being wheeled off. They weren't walking off. That is standard procedure, because when you're that adjusted to the 0G environment and you're readjusting to the 1G environment, there's a very real risk you can fall from the decompensation. You might faint. And so that's just a matter of safety protocol. They're still relearning to walk, even though they're very capable astronauts. So as you've heard, they've now been whisked away for medical evaluation at the Johnson Space Center in conjunction with the flight surgeons there. So, all of that is pretty standard, and it's great to see that after this mission, everyone was smiling when they egressed the capsule.
Yeah, I remember having conversations with former International Space Station Commander Chris Hadfield about just the changes to his body when you're up in space for that amount of time. It can be tough to deal with. Like, what are going to be some of the challenges for them in the next coming days as they head back home?
Yeah, absolutely. So to kind of get more into the nitty gritty of it, when you talk about what happens to your neurosensory changes and looking at the adaptation and the readaptation your body needs to undergo. So there's this mismatch that happens when you're transitioning between different gravity environments. So the way we sense where our body is in space is this delicate coordination between what our eyes see, what our inner ears perceive as up or down, and then what our proprioceptors in our skin perceives as where our body is in space. And so there's this adjustment period that happens once you're going to 0G, and then you haven't had to deal with that for 9 months. And then when you're coming back to Earth, even if you've had the best landing, you're undergoing G forces of up to 4 Gs. You know, you may have been in this capsule that was on the ocean, even though it was calm. You've been tumbling a little bit. So it is probably the world's most challenging roller coaster ride. And then when you're talking about cardiovascular readaptation, your valves in your veins haven't really had to work hard for 9 months. They don't have to worry about pushing blood back up, a one-way valve back up to your heart. And so those valves kind of get lazy. They get what we call decompensated. So if you're to stand up right away, all of that blood is going to pool to your feet. You are at a high risk of fainting. Plus your muscles, even if you're doing exercise up on station, have probably become weaker. So there's a lot of rehabilitation that is individualized to each astronaut. And that will happen over the next few weeks.
I know that they're going to be able to speak to the media at some point in the coming days. And I know somebody's going to ask them about what's the first thing you want to eat after eating space food for 9 months. But I have to ask you before I let you go. Listen, you're due to take a commercial space flight. Do you have any concerns that it's going to be longer than what you signed up for?
You know, I very much trust the team at Virgin Galactic where I'll be flying. They've been great. And you know what? That's part of what I call the astronaut mentality. You have to be prepared for everything. In my case, it will almost certainly be a same-day mission. But, you know, we practice for contingencies, more so in science within our case. But, you know, that's what the mission entails.
Listen, it was great to speak with you this morning. Dr. Shauna Pandya coming to us from Edmonton this morning. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
If you like that video, make sure to subscribe to the Your Morning YouTube feed, where you can find all kinds of new content posted every weekday morning.